thousands of years ago, an ancient text claimed that humanity was living in a state of spiritual forgetfulness, and that the greatest power available to us was not hidden in temples, treasures, or secret rituals. But within the mind itself, it claimed that humanity possessed a divine nature it had forgotten, not a secret weapon, not a magic spell, but a forgotten way of seeing. That text became known as the Corpus Hermeticum, and hidden within its ancient dialogues are teachings about the divine mind, spiritual awakening, and the transformation of human consciousness. Ideas that later generations would regard as mysterious, sacred, and even forbidden. But the deepest secret is not what the universe can give you. It is what you must become capable of seeing. Tonight, we enter the world of the Corpus Hermeticum. Its visions, forgotten teachings, cosmic mysteries, and the ancient path of regeneration. But listen carefully, because the deeper you go, the meaning of divine power begins to change. And by the end, you may discover that the ancient sages were never really teaching you how to control reality. They were teaching you how to awaken within it. Chapter 1. Hermes Trismegistus and the Mystery of Our Divine Origin. The Corpus Hermeticum does not read like a modern self-help manual. It is filled with conversations about God, cosmos, mind, nature, rebirth, ignorance, and the possibility of transformation. Its language can be mystical, symbolic, and difficult. But beneath the ancient vocabulary lies a powerful psychological idea. A person can live without truly knowing themselves. The person who wants to understand reality must first examine the instrument through which reality is experienced. That instrument is the mind. This is where Hermetic philosophy becomes especially fascinating. The famous Hermetic maxim, often associated with the Kabbalion, "The all is mind," is frequently treated today as a magical formula for manifestation. But the Kabbalion is a modern work published in 1908 and should not simply be presented as though it were an ancient passage from the Corpus Hermeticum. The historical distinction matters. The actual Hermetic writings contain a much older and more complex conception of nous, often translated as mind or intellect. In texts such as the Poimandres, divine mind becomes central to understanding humanity and the cosmos. This does not mean that thinking a thought automatically causes external reality to obey. It means something more subtle. Your experience of reality is inseparable from consciousness. A person who believes the world is permanently hostile, behaves differently from someone who believes difficulties can be approached as problems to solve. A person convinced that they are powerless notices different possibilities than someone who believes they possess some capacity to act. The circumstances may initially be identical. The interpretation is not, and interpretation affects behavior. Behavior creates consequences. Consequences become patterns. Parspals gradually become a life. That is why ancient mental discipline was never merely intellectual entertainment. The question was not simply, "What do you believe?" It was, "What kind of person does your mind repeatedly create?" Think about someone approaching retirement after 40 years of work. For decades, their identity may have depended upon a position, a title, a salary, or the respect of colleagues. Then one morning the office disappears, the external role ends, and suddenly an uncomfortable question emerges. Who am I without the role? The Hermetic tradition would invite deeper inquiry. You are not merely your occupation. You are not merely your reputation. You are not merely the collection of memories attached to your name. Those things describe parts of your experience. They do not necessarily exhaust the mystery of the person experiencing them. This is where the idea of humanity's divine heritage should be handled carefully. Hermetic texts sometimes describe humanity as possessing a special relationship to divine mind and the cosmos. Rather than turning this into a claim of supernatural superiority, we can read it philosophically. Human beings possess the capacity for self-reflection. We can observe our own thoughts. We can question our motives. We can recognize our destructive patterns. We can deliberately change our behavior. We can contemplate existence itself. That capacity is extraordinary enough. You do not need to imagine yourself as a supernatural being to appreciate it. Perhaps the ancient mystery was simply trying to awaken a faculty most people leave unused: self-awareness. So try something simple. Today, observe one recurring mental habit. Maybe it is the habit of expecting criticism. Maybe it is rehearsing old arguments. Maybe it is comparing yourself with someone else. Maybe it is automatically reaching for your phone whenever silence appears. Do not attempt to destroy the habit. First, see it, because the moment you can observe a mental pattern rather than automatically becoming it, a small distance appears. And within that distance is choice. That is where transformation begins. Chapter 2. The Hermetic Art of Mental Transformation. The ancient Hermetic writings repeatedly place importance upon nous, mind or intellect, and upon the possibility of awakening from ignorance. The deeper implication is that human beings are not merely victims of every impulse passing through consciousness. There is a capacity to examine, distinguish, and deliberately direct oneself. Imagine a young apprentice standing in the workshop of an old craftsman. The apprentice wants to create a magnificent object. He studies the tools. He memorizes the techniques. He watches the master work. But whenever he becomes impatient, he strikes too quickly. Whenever he becomes frustrated, he throws the tool down. Whenever another craftsman succeeds, envy distracts him. One afternoon, the old master finally says, "You have learned how to use the tools. You have not learned how to use yourself." That sentence captures something profound. A person can possess knowledge while remaining governed by impulse. And this is one of the great problems of modern life. Someone says, "I want peace," but begins every morning consuming outrage. They say, "I want confidence," but spend hours comparing themselves with strangers. They say, "I want financial stability," yet repeatedly make impulsive purchases to relieve temporary emotions. They say, "I want a better relationship," but enter every disagreement determined to win. The contradiction is rarely visible in the moment. The person sees each action separately. The ancient philosopher looks at the pattern, because repeated attention becomes repeated thought. Repeated thought influences behavior. Repeated behavior becomes habit. Habit begins shaping character, and character gradually shapes destiny. This is not a magical law. It is a human one. Your mind is constantly being trained by what you repeatedly expose it to. If you continually feed resentment, resentment becomes easier to access. If you repeatedly practice gratitude, noticing what remains becomes easier. If you continually rehearse fear, the world begins appearing full of threats. If you practice pausing before reacting, the pause becomes more available when pressure arrives. The Hermetic idea of mental transformation therefore becomes much more powerful when understood as discipline rather than fantasy. Transformation means learning to examine the inner movements that previously controlled you. It means asking, why did that comment make me angry? Why do I need that person's approval? Why does uncertainty frighten me? Why do I keep repeating a behavior I claim to dislike? Why do I continue feeding an emotion I say I want to release? These questions are not comfortable, but they are useful, and ancient wisdom was rarely interested in making the seeker comfortable. It was interested in making the seeker awake. Consider a man who has spent decades carrying resentment toward an old business partner. Every time he tells the story, he becomes angry again. He believes he is preserving justice, but perhaps he is also preserving the wound. The event happened once. The mind has repeated it hundreds of times. At some point, the original event and the repeated memory become psychologically intertwined. Transformation does not require pretending the betrayal never happened. It requires recognizing that continuing to rehearse it is another decision. That distinction creates freedom. So here is the practice. Choose one mental habit that contradicts the life you claim to want, not 10. 1. Observe it for 7 days. Do not immediately try to eliminate it. Watch when it appears. Notice what triggers it. Notice what emotion accompanies it. Notice what behavior follows it. And then ask, what would I choose if I did not have to obey this pattern? That question creates distance, and distance creates choice. The deepest mental transformation may therefore be less about acquiring new thoughts and more about becoming conscious of the thoughts you already possess. Because you cannot transform what you refuse to observe, awareness comes before mastery. Chapter 3. The death of the false self and the birth of the true self. What if the identity you have spent decades protecting is not the deepest version of who you are? This is one of the most uncomfortable questions ancient philosophy can ask, because identity feels permanent. I am a businessman. I am a mother. I am respected. I am successful. I am the one who knows. I am the one who was wronged. I am the person everyone depends upon. These statements may describe real parts of a life, but eventually, life begins removing them. A career ends, children leave home, a marriage changes, the body grows older, a reputation fades. A person who once commanded attention discovers that people no longer ask for their opinion. And suddenly, beneath the familiar identity, there is silence. For some, that silence feels like death. The Hermetic tradition repeatedly uses the language of rebirth and transformation. Its imagery suggests that genuine knowledge requires more than acquiring information. The person seeking higher understanding must undergo an inner change. The old way of seeing must give way to another. This resembles the symbolism of ancient initiation traditions. Imagine an initiate approaching the entrance of a temple at night. Behind him is the ordinary world. The name he carries, the status he possesses, the expectations others have placed upon him. Before him is darkness. He cannot enter while carrying every assumption unchanged. The darkness therefore becomes symbolic, not punishment, not destruction. A temporary separation from the familiar. The initiate must discover what remains when the external labels become quiet. This is psychological rebirth, and it can happen without any mystical ceremony. Consider a man who spent 40 years building a respected career. His office was more than a workplace. It was proof that he mattered, proof that he was competent, proof that other people needed him. Then retirement arrives. At first, freedom feels wonderful. Then something strange happens. Nobody calls. There are no meetings, no deadlines, no junior employees waiting for instructions. The calendar becomes empty, and the man begins asking, "If I am no longer that person, who am I?" This is where transformation can begin, not because retirement is automatically spiritual, but because life has removed a mask that was previously difficult to see. The same thing can happen after divorce, after the death of a spouse, after children become independent, after financial success disappears, after moving to a new country, after physical strength declines. Every major transition can expose the difference between who you are and who you became accustomed to being. There is another false self that ancient philosophy repeatedly challenges: the person who must always be right. This identity is particularly dangerous because it hides behind intelligence. If being right becomes part of your identity, admitting ignorance feels like humiliation. A simple disagreement becomes a threat. A correction becomes an insult. Another person's success becomes evidence against your worth. So the ego fights, not because the truth matters, because identity matters. But imagine how much energy is released when you no longer need to win every argument. You can say, "I may be wrong. I don't know. I need to think about that. Tell me what I'm missing." These are not statements of weakness. They are signs that identity is becoming less fragile. The false self survives through constant defense. The deeper self requires less defense. This does not mean becoming passive. You can still have principles. You can still protect yourself. You can still disagree. But you no longer need every disagreement to prove your worth. That is a profound form of freedom. The ancient image of rebirth can therefore be understood psychologically. You do not literally need to die and return as another being. You can allow an outdated identity to die, the identity that needed everyone's approval, the identity that could never apologize, the identity that believed wealth proved worth, the identity that believed aging meant becoming irrelevant, the identity that confused busyness with purpose. When one of these identities loosens, something unexpected happens. There is room for curiosity, room for humility, room for a new purpose, room for relationships that are not based on performance, room for wisdom. This is why transformation can initially feel like loss. You are not always gaining something immediately. Sometimes you are first losing an attachment, and that can hurt. But ask yourself, what identity would I be willing to release if I knew something wiser could replace it? Do not answer quickly. Let the question remain, because sometimes transformation begins by losing who you thought you were. The old self cannot govern the new life. Chapter 4. The 7 Hermetic Keys to Understanding Reality. There is a popular list of 7 principles often presented as the ancient secrets of Hermes. Consider the first, mentalism. The Kybalion presents reality through the language of mind, rather than interpreting this as think something and the universe must obey. Consider the psychological truth beneath the metaphor. Your mind participates in the world you experience. Attention selects, interpretation frames, expectation influences behavior, belief affects decisions. Your thoughts do not magically control every external event, but they influence the person who meets those events. That is significant. Then comes correspondence. As above, so below is often used as a slogan for manifestation. But philosophically, correspondence can invite us to look for relationships between patterns. A person who constantly experiences conflict may need to examine not only everyone around them, but also the patterns they repeatedly bring into relationships. This does not mean blaming victims. It means asking where personal agency exists. Next, vibration. Modern interpretations sometimes turn this into a promise that raising your frequency automatically attracts wealth. That is not a sound historical conclusion. As a metaphor, however, vibration can represent the changing quality of mental and emotional states. Fear feels different from calm. Rage feels different from gratitude. Despair feels different from curiosity. Your internal state changes how you approach the same circumstance. Then comes polarity opposites: hot and cold, fear and courage, love and resentment, successes and failure. The philosophical lesson is that human experience often exists on continuums rather than absolute categories. A person terrified of public speaking may gradually become comfortable through repeated exposure. Courage does not necessarily appear as the opposite of fear. Sometimes courage develops alongside fear, then rhythm. Life moves through cycles. Energy rises and falls. Seasons change. Fortunes change. Bodies age. Relationships evolve. Modern culture often encourages people to interpret every decline as failure. Ancient wisdom offers another possibility. Perhaps some declines are simply part of rhythm. The wise person learns when to push and when to recover. Then cause and effect. This principle is perhaps the easiest to understand. Talks have consequences. Habits accumulate. Choices compound. You cannot repeatedly neglect your finances and expect financial stability to appear from nowhere. You cannot repeatedly damage relationships and expect trust to remain untouched. You cannot repeatedly feed distraction and expect concentration to become stronger. This is not mystical. It is practical. Finally, gender. The Kybalion uses gender as a metaphysical principle involving complementary generative forces. It should not be casually equated with modern biological or social ideas about gender. As a philosophical metaphor, it can be interpreted as the interaction of complementary processes involved in creation. The important lesson is not to force modern meanings onto an older text, or older meanings onto a modern one. That brings us to the deeper principle behind all seven: discernment. Ancient wisdom becomes dangerous when treated as unquestionable. A symbol is not automatically a scientific law. A mystical metaphor is not automatically a physical mechanism. A beautiful ancient phrase does not become true simply because it is ancient. And skepticism does not require cynicism. You can remain fascinated while asking questions. You can appreciate mystery without surrendering reason. You can study spiritual traditions without pretending every claim has been proven. That is especially important for anyone exploring Hermeticism today. The real value may not be discovering 7 invisible forces controlling the universe. It may be discovering 7 different ways to examine your own relationship with mind, change, action, emotion, and consequence. So take one principle, cause and effect. For the next week, watch one repeated behavior. What does it produce? Not what do you hope it produces? What does it actually produce? That question transforms philosophy into observation, and observation transforms belief into understanding, because wisdom requires something more difficult than belief. It requires discernment. Wisdom requires discernment, not blind belief. Chapter 5. The False Promise of Manifestation. When Hermetic wisdom becomes magical thinking, the Hermetic tradition contains powerful reflections on mind, consciousness, divine order, and humanity's relationship to the cosmos. But these teachings should not be confused with a guarantee that every thought produces an external event. The distinction matters. If a person believes that every desire must manifest simply because they imagined it strongly enough, disappointment becomes personal failure. If the money does not arrive, they blame their vibration. If the relationship collapses, they assume they visualized incorrectly. If illness appears, they may be tempted to believe they somehow thought badly enough to deserve it. That is not wisdom. That is guilt wearing mystical clothing. The ancient philosophers repeatedly connected understanding with discipline. A person who wants freedom must become capable of governing impulses. A person who wants wisdom must tolerate uncertainty. A person who wants prosperity must learn stewardship. A person who wants influence must develop character strong enough to carry it. Mystery does not excuse irresponsibility. Consider the farmer. He may pray for rain, but he still prepares the field. He may hope for harvest, but he still plants. He cannot control the weather, yet he can control whether the seed is placed in the ground. This is where Hermetic thought becomes psychologically useful. Your inner world matters because it influences what you notice, what you believe, how you behave, what opportunities you recognize, and how persistently you act. A fearful person may interpret every setback as proof that nothing will work. A disciplined person may interpret the same setback as information. The outer world has not magically changed, but the person's relationship with it has, and that can change a life. Think of someone approaching retirement after decades of work. They say they want a peaceful second chapter, yet every morning they consume outrage, compare themselves with younger people, and repeatedly rehearse everything they have lost. They may speak about abundance while practicing scarcity. They may speak about freedom while remaining psychologically imprisoned by other people's approval. The contradiction is the real problem. So try a different experiment. Choose one desire you have been carrying for a long time. Instead of asking only, "How can I manifest this?" ask, "What kind of person would be capable of handling this well?" If you want financial security, perhaps the answer includes discipline. If you want meaningful relationships, perhaps it includes patience and honesty. If you want influence, perhaps it includes responsibility. If you want inner peace, perhaps it includes learning not to feed every disturbance. This turns mystical language into practical transformation. The ancient mystery was never merely about obtaining objects. It was about becoming capable of seeing reality differently. And sometimes the greatest manifestation is not receiving what you imagined. It is becoming someone who no longer needs to be controlled by the desire. Chapter 6. The Secret of News. The Mind That Knows Itself. There is a strange question hidden inside the Hermetic tradition. What happens when the mind becomes aware of the mind itself? Ancient Hermetic writings speak of Nu, commonly translated as intellect, mind, or divine intellectual intelligence. It is not simply the stream of thoughts passing through the head. This distinction is crucial. Your mind can produce thousands of thoughts without producing a single moment of wisdom. You can know hundreds of facts and still misunderstand yourself. You can consume books about consciousness while remaining completely unaware of the emotions controlling your decisions. The ancient seeker, therefore, faced an unusual task, not merely acquiring more information, but learning to see the machinery of his own mind. Imagine a student approaching an old teacher and asking, "How can I become wise?" The teacher does not hand him another manuscript. Instead, he asks, "What happens inside you when someone insults you?" The student answers, "I become angry." The teacher asks, "And who notices the anger?" The student pauses. There is the beginning of the lesson. Because if you can notice anger, then anger is something occurring within your experience. It may be powerful, but it is not necessarily the whole of you. The same applies to fear. You can notice fear. You can notice envy. You can notice the desire for approval. You can notice the thought that says, "I am a failure." And once you can observe a thought, you have created a small distance between the thought and the one responding to it. That distance can become freedom. Modern life makes this extraordinarily difficult. A person wakes and immediately reaches for a phone. One notification produces curiosity, another produces anxiety, a photograph produces comparison, a headline produces anger, a message produces anticipation. Before breakfast, the mind has already been pulled through dozens of emotional landscapes. Then the person wonders why silence feels uncomfortable. The problem may not be that they think too much. It may be that they have forgotten how to observe thinking. More thoughts do not necessarily mean more awareness. Imagine a pond. When the surface is constantly disturbed, even a clear reflection becomes difficult to see. The moon has not disappeared. The water simply cannot hold its image steadily. The Hermetic idea of news can be approached in a similar philosophical way. Deeper understanding requires more than accumulating mental noise. It requires the capacity to distinguish between passing impressions and deliberate understanding. This does not mean suppressing thoughts. Suppression is another form of struggle. Instead, observe. When a thought appears, ask, "Is this true? Then is this useful? And finally, do I need to obey it?" A thought saying, "Everyone is against me," is not automatically a fact. A thought saying, "I must answer this immediately," is not a command. A thought saying, "I am too old to begin again," may be a memory disguised as prophecy. The pause between thought and action is where self-mastery begins. This idea has an ancient echo far beyond Hermeticism. Stoic philosophers trained themselves to examine impressions before accepting them. Buddhist practice developed careful observation of mental events. Neoplatonism emphasized turning attention inward toward the deeper source of intellect and being. Different traditions used different languages, but the psychological question remains remarkably similar. Can you see what is happening inside you before it becomes what you do? That is where the idea of divine mind becomes more than mystical vocabulary. It becomes an invitation to consciousness. Perhaps news is not something you prove you possess. Perhaps it is a direction of attention, a movement away from mechanical reaction and toward understanding. Tonight, notice one recurring thought. Do not fight it. Do not worship it. Do not immediately believe it. Simply watch it arrive, change, and disappear. Then notice the awareness that remained while the thought changed. That small discovery may be more valuable than another 100 theories about hidden knowledge, because the deepest secret is not that the mind can produce extraordinary thoughts. It is that you can become conscious of the mind producing them. And when awareness begins observing itself, the ancient journey truly begins. Chapter 7. The Fall into Matter. Why humans become trapped by appearances. Imagine a man who spends 40 years building a magnificent palace. Its columns are carved from stone, its gardens are carefully tended, and its rooms are filled with objects acquired from distant lands. Everyone who visits calls him fortunate. Yet every night, before sleeping, he walks through the palace checking the locks. He listens for footsteps. He worries about fire. He fears thieves. He calculates what would happen if the harvest failed, if his rivals became stronger, if his children fought over the inheritance, if the palace itself were taken from him. Eventually, the strange truth becomes visible. The palace was built to give him freedom. Instead, he became its prisoner. This is one of the deepest psychological meanings behind ancient warnings about attachment to the material world. The Hermetic tradition did not require us to imagine ordinary existence as worthless. The Corpus Hermeticum contains a much more complicated picture of humanity, mind, nature, and the divine. Matter is not simply a villain waiting to be defeated. The danger lies in forgetting our deeper capacity for awareness while becoming completely identified with appearances. A house can be useful. Money can provide security. A position can allow someone to serve others. The body deserves care. Pleasure can be enjoyed. The problem begins when possession becomes identity. When a person says, "My wealth is me, my reputation is me, my youth is me, my position is me, my possessions are me," then every threat to those things feels like a threat to existence itself. This is why ancient cynic philosophers could appear so radical. Thinkers associated with cynicism challenged conventional ideas about status, luxury, and social approval. Their simplicity was not merely poverty for its own sake. It was an experiment in freedom. How little does a human being actually need before the fear of losing everything begins to weaken? The Stoics approached the same problem differently. They did not necessarily demand that a person abandon possessions. They asked the person to understand their proper place. If fortune gives you something, use it wisely. If fortune removes it, do not surrender your character with it. That distinction is enormous. A wealthy person who understands impermanence may be freer than a poor person consumed by envy, and a person with very little can still become psychologically imprisoned by the desperate belief that one possession, one relationship, or one achievement will finally make life secure. The ancient Gnostic traditions added another layer to this question through their language of forgetfulness. Their imagery often describes humanity as possessing a deeper spiritual dimension while becoming absorbed in the visible world. Read philosophically, the warning is strikingly modern. You can become so fascinated by what is outside that you forget to examine what is happening inside. Consider the modern retiree who spent decades pursuing professional recognition. Then retirement arrives. The title disappears. The office disappears. The schedule disappears. Suddenly, the person asks a question that success allowed them to postpone. Who am I when nobody needs my position? Or consider someone who has spent a lifetime accumulating money because poverty once frightened them. Even after becoming financially secure, the fear remains. The numbers grow, but the anxiety grows with them. The prison was never entirely financial. It was psychological. The same pattern appears in relationships. A person may love someone deeply, but when love becomes possession, fear enters. Instead of asking, "How can I care for this person?" the mind begins asking, "How can I make sure I never lose this person?" Love becomes surveillance. Security becomes control. Possession becomes imprisonment when fear guards it. So the Hermetic lesson can be approached without superstition. Do not hate the material world. Learn to see it clearly. Use possessions without becoming possessed by them. Enjoy success without making success responsible for your identity. Care for the body without believing that youth can last forever. Build wealth without worshiping wealth. Love people without pretending you can control their existence. And occasionally ask yourself a difficult question. If this disappeared tomorrow, what part of me would remain? Whatever remains is closer to your real foundation. The practical exercise is simple. Choose one material thing you strongly fear losing. Perhaps money, status, appearance, a possession, or professional identity. Then separate two questions. What practical responsibility can I take? And what fear am I carrying that responsibility cannot solve? Prepare where preparation is possible. Ratius, what cannot be guaranteed, that is not passivity, it is freedom with responsibility. And perhaps this is what the ancient warning was really trying to reveal. The world becomes dangerous not when you possess things, but when things begin possessing your attention, your identity, and your peace. The goal is not to escape the world. The goal is to stop being imprisoned by appearances. Chapter 8. How the search for enlightenment can become a prison. There is an even more subtle prison than attachment to money. It is attachment to being the person who knows. Imagine a seeker who spends years studying ancient manuscripts. He learns the names of forgotten philosophers. He reads about Hermes, Nu, Gnosis, initiation, hidden symbols, sacred geometry, mystical traditions, and secret teachings. At first, something beautiful happens. He becomes curious. Then he becomes fascinated. Then, almost imperceptibly, the fascination changes. He begins looking at ordinary people differently. They don't understand. They are asleep. I know what they don't know. The search for wisdom has quietly become a new identity. The ego has discovered spiritual language, and it likes what it sees. This is one of the most dangerous possibilities in any tradition of inner development. A person can abandon ordinary arrogance and replace it with spiritual arrogance. Instead of saying, "I am richer than you," the ego says, "I am more awakened than you." Instead of saying, "I am more intelligent," it says, "I understand the hidden truth." Instead of seeking approval through possessions, it seeks approval through secret knowledge. The costume changes. The psychological mechanism may not. Ancient wisdom traditions repeatedly warned about pride for precisely this reason. Knowledge can illuminate the mind, but knowledge can also become another object of attachment. Even Socratic philosophy offers a powerful antidote. Socrates became famous not because he claimed possession of ultimate wisdom, but because he repeatedly exposed the limits of human certainty. His questioning created an uncomfortable possibility. Perhaps knowing that you do not know is wiser than pretending to know everything. That attitude is desperately relevant in an age of endless spiritual information. Today, a person can spend hours moving from one supposed secret to another, a hidden frequency, a secret vibration, a forgotten civilization, a mysterious symbol, a cosmic message, a teacher claiming exclusive access. Each discovery promises to reveal the final piece. But the seeker may never notice the irony. The endless search for secret knowledge can itself become a distraction from ordinary self-knowledge. You can know 20 theories about consciousness and still be unable to control your temper. You can quote ancient philosophy and still treat people cruelly. You can speak constantly about spiritual awakening while remaining terrified of criticism. You can study detachment while being obsessed with whether others recognize how enlightened you are. That is the test. not what you claim to know. What does your knowledge do to your character? Does it make you more patient, more independent, more honest, more compassionate, more willing to admit uncertainty? Or does it make you increasingly suspicious, superior, dependent, and certain? A genuine teaching should survive questions. A genuine teacher should not require the destruction of your judgment. And genuine inner development should gradually reduce the need to feel special. This does not mean abandoning mystery. Mystery is valuable. Wonder is valuable. Ancient symbols can open extraordinary philosophical questions. But mystery becomes dangerous when uncertainty is replaced by absolute certainty without evidence. The seeker must therefore learn a difficult discipline. Hold the mystery without worshiping your interpretation of it. Whenever a teaching makes you feel superior, pause. Whenever someone claims exclusive access to truth, investigate. Whenever a teacher discourages questions, become more cautious, not less. Whenever an idea tells you that disagreement proves another person is asleep, examine the idea twice. And whenever your spiritual identity becomes more important than your actual behavior, return to the beginning. The ancient mystery schools were imagined as places of initiation, transformation, and preparation. Whether or not every later story about them is historically accurate, the symbolic lesson remains powerful. Information is not initiation. Reading about transformation is not transformation. Knowing the vocabulary of wisdom is not the same as living wisely. The final test of hidden knowledge is therefore surprisingly ordinary. How do you behave when nobody is impressed? How do you respond when you are wrong? How do you treat someone who cannot give you anything? How calmly can you say, "I don't know," and can you continue learning without needing to become the chosen one? The greatest secret may be that there is no crown waiting for the person who awakens. There is only greater responsibility. The more clearly you see yourself, the less excuse you have for remaining governed by pride. The more you understand human psychology, the less justification you have for manipulating others. The more you study ancient wisdom, the more carefully you should distinguish knowledge from fantasy. The ego can wear sacred clothing, so remove the costume, keep the curiosity, keep the humility, keep the mystery, and let your life, not your claims, become the evidence of what you have learned. Chapter 9. The Hermetic View of Death. What if the fear of death is not merely fear of ending, but fear of discovering what we spent our life becoming? Imagine an elderly merchant standing alone in the courtyard of his house after sunset. For decades he had counted coins, expanded his property, negotiated contracts, and built a reputation that traveled farther than his footsteps. Yet one evening, looking across everything he had accumulated, he realized something unsettling. None of it could answer the question he had avoided. Who had he become while acquiring it all? This question lies close to the heart of ancient philosophy. The Hermetic writings did not reduce human existence to the body alone. They repeatedly explored the relationship between body, soul, intellect, mortality, and the possibility of transformation. The exact texts are diverse, and they do not present one simple doctrine of death, but they share a recurring philosophical movement. The human being is invited to stop identifying completely with the temporary and begin contemplating what is deeper. This is where Hermetic thought becomes especially powerful for an older listener. Because age has a strange way of removing illusions, the young person can imagine that time is endless. The older person knows better. The face changes. Friends disappear. Children become independent. Careers end. Possessions change hands. The body announces its limitations. Even the identity that once seemed permanent begins to loosen. And suddenly, mortality is no longer an abstract philosophical problem. It becomes personal. Ancient thinkers repeatedly used this awareness not to produce despair but clarity. The Stoics practiced memento mori, remembering mortality, not because death was desirable, but because remembering it could expose misplaced priorities. Ecclesiastes similarly confronts the temporary nature of achievement, pleasure, wealth, and reputation. Buddhist traditions emphasize impermanence. Hermetic writings explore the movement from ignorance toward knowledge of the divine and intellectual dimensions of human existence. These traditions disagree in important ways, but they converge around one uncomfortable insight. You live differently when you remember that you will not live forever. Consider how many conversations people postpone. I'll call them someday. I'll apologize when things settle down. I'll start writing when I have more time. I'll change when retirement begins. I'll become the person I know I should be later. But later is not a possession. Later is a possibility, and possibility is never guaranteed. There is another ancient image worth remembering: the soul's journey away from excessive identification with the material world. Read philosophically. This does not require imagining a literal map of the afterlife. It can also describe something happening while we are still alive. The gradual discovery that possessions are not identity, that reputation is not identity, that physical appearance is not identity, that professional achievement is not identity, that even our memories are not the whole of who we are. A person who has spent 50 years saying, "I am my profession," may experience retirement as a kind of death. The job disappears, and suddenly the question becomes, who am I now? Someone who defined themselves entirely as a parent may feel lost when their children leave home. Someone who built their identity around physical strength may struggle when the body becomes slower. Someone who spent decades pursuing wealth may discover that financial security cannot purchase unlimited time. This is why mortality can become an instructor. It strips away the fantasy that the temporary can be made permanent. But there is a danger here. Contemplating death should not become an excuse to abandon responsibility or stop enjoying ordinary life. Ancient wisdom was not simply saying, "Everything ends, therefore nothing matters." The deeper lesson is almost the opposite. Because things end, they matter differently. A meal with someone you love becomes more precious. A conversation becomes more urgent. A walk becomes more noticeable. An apology becomes less humiliating and more necessary. A neglected dream becomes harder to justify. So try a simple practice. Ask yourself, if I knew this year contained one of my final chapters, what would deserve more attention? Not what would make you famous, not what would impress strangers. What would make your life more honest? Perhaps it is repairing a relationship. Perhaps it is finishing something you began decades ago. Perhaps it is finally forgiving yourself for a mistake. Perhaps it is simply becoming more present for the people who are still here. Mortality does not tell you exactly what to choose. It removes some of the excuses. Mortality clarifies priorities. Chapter 10, The Wealth of Hermes. Prosperity without becoming its servant. Now imagine a different scene. A merchant enters an ancient marketplace carrying a heavy purse. Every step makes the coins inside whisper against one another. People look at him with respect. He has succeeded, but every few moments his hand returns to the purse. Is it still there? Has someone taken it? Did he count correctly? Could he lose everything? He possesses wealth, yet psychologically, wealth possesses him. This distinction is essential. Ancient commerce was not inherently regarded as a spiritual failure. Merchants traded goods across cities. Craftsmen built businesses. Farmers cultivated land. Administrators managed resources. Wealth could support families, communities, temples, institutions, and charitable acts. The problem was not necessarily possession. The problem was enslavement to possession. This is where Hermetic philosophy can be brought into conversation with Stoicism, Cynicism, and other ancient traditions. The question is not simply, how much do you own? It is, how much of yourself must you surrender to protect what you own? A person can have little money and still live inside a scarcity prison. Another can have considerable wealth and remain psychologically free. Scarcity psychology constantly whispers, "Not enough. You are falling behind. Someone else has more. You must accumulate before it is too late." And modern life can intensify this voice through comparison. Every screen becomes another marketplace. Every successful stranger becomes evidence of personal inadequacy. But ethical prosperity requires something more grounded. Money is a tool. It can provide shelter. It can support education. It can create opportunities. It can help a family survive difficult seasons. It can fund useful work. It can allow a person to contribute to others. But when money becomes identity, the tool becomes a master. The ancient ideal of stewardship offers a better model. Imagine being entrusted with a fertile field. You did not create the rain. You did not invent the soil. You did not command the seasons. But you are responsible for what you do with what has been placed in your care. That is stewardship. Your money is one form of stewardship. So are your skills, your time, your relationships, your reputation, your opportunities, your health, your influence. The mature question, therefore, changes from, "How can I get more?" to, "How can I use what I have wisely?" This does not mean rejecting ambition. A person can pursue financial success while remaining ethical. They can build a company, learn a profession, invest carefully, save for retirement, support their children, create employment, give generously. The crucial distinction is whether prosperity expands responsibility or merely expands appetite. Ancient wisdom would have understood the danger of endlessly increasing desire. If every achievement creates another hunger, then accumulation has no natural stopping point. You can reach 1 million and immediately fear 10 million. You can become respected and immediately fear becoming irrelevant. You can retire comfortably and still spend every morning comparing yourself with someone richer. The number changes. The psychological structure remains. So practice something deceptively simple. Look at what you currently possess, financially, intellectually, socially, and spiritually. Then ask, what am I neglecting because I am obsessed with acquiring something else? Perhaps the answer is your family, perhaps your health, perhaps a skill you stopped developing, perhaps peace of mind, perhaps time itself. This is the ancient shift from accumulation to stewardship, and it changes the meaning of prosperity. Prosperity is not merely having more things. It is possessing enough freedom, wisdom, discipline, and character to use what you have without becoming its servant. The wealthy person who cannot sleep because of what might be lost is not necessarily prosperous. The person with modest means who knows how to live, give, build, save, and appreciate may possess something more difficult to measure: freedom. So, let wealth serve life. Let ambition serve purpose. Let possessions serve responsibility. And never confuse the size of your storehouse with the depth of your existence. Possession is not the same as prosperity. Chapter 11. The soul's journey back to the One. There comes a point in every serious search when another question appears. You have accumulated information. You have studied philosophies. You have read ancient texts. You have learned the names of teachers, principles, symbols, and mysteries. But then something unsettling happens. You realize that information has not necessarily made you wiser. You know more. But do you see more clearly? You possess more explanations. But do you live differently? This was one of the great concerns behind the philosophical tradition associated with Plotinus and Neoplatonism. Plotinus described reality in terms of a movement toward the One, the ultimate principle beyond ordinary multiplicity and division. His philosophy is complex, and it should not be reduced to a simplistic formula about manifesting your desires. The deeper philosophical image is one of return. The fragmented mind gradually turns toward unity. The scattered self begins gathering itself. The person consumed by external appearances begins asking what lies beneath them, and this creates a remarkable connection with the entire journey we have traveled. At the beginning, the seeker wanted more knowledge, more power, more certainty, more wealth, more experiences, more hidden teachings. But the further the seeker travels, the more the question changes. What can I remove? What unnecessary fear can I release? What compulsive desire can I loosen? What identity no longer serves me? What resentment have I carried too long? What distraction keeps dividing my attention? What illusion have I mistaken for truth? This is the movement from information toward wisdom. Imagine an ancient philosopher walking through a crowded city. Around him are merchants shouting prices, travelers negotiating, politicians seeking influence, workers carrying goods, children running through narrow streets. Everything is movement. Everything is competing for attention. Yet the philosopher understands that the greatest battle is not taking place in the marketplace. It is taking place inside the mind. One thought pulls toward greed, another toward fear, another toward pride, another toward resentment, another whispers, "You are not enough." And beneath all of them is the possibility of stillness, the possibility of observing without immediately obeying. This is where the idea of the divine mind becomes philosophically useful. We do not need to pretend that we have discovered a supernatural mechanism for controlling reality. Instead, we can treat divine mind as an ancient philosophical symbol for the possibility that consciousness can move beyond its narrowest, self-centered patterns. The person begins to recognize interconnectedness. Their actions affect others. Their words leave traces. Their choices create consequences. Their prosperity can serve. Their knowledge can become wisdom. Their suffering can become compassion. Their mortality can become clarity. And their individuality no longer requires isolation. This is where the ego-centered search begins to dissolve. The question is no longer, how can I become extraordinary? It becomes, how can I become useful, awake, and whole? That is a quieter question, but perhaps a more dangerous one because it demands action. A person can spend years discussing consciousness while remaining impatient with their spouse. They can study ancient wisdom while treating employees cruelly. They can speak about universal unity while despising anyone who disagrees with them. They can claim spiritual insight while being incapable of admitting a mistake. Information can decorate the ego. Wisdom transforms behavior. That distinction matters. The return to the One, interpreted psychologically and philosophically, is therefore not necessarily an escape from ordinary life. It can mean returning to coherence within ordinary life. You become more attentive, more honest, more responsible, more compassionate. You stop needing every experience to confirm your importance. You stop interpreting every coincidence as a cosmic command. You stop demanding that reality obey every desire. And strangely, this surrender of control can create a deeper form of freedom. Because when the ego stops insisting that everything must revolve around itself, the world becomes larger. Other people become real again. Their suffering matters. Their hopes matter. Their dignity matters. The future matters. Even nature becomes something other than a collection of resources waiting to satisfy human appetite. The ancient search for unity, therefore, becomes a practical discipline. Look for division within yourself. Where belief contradicts action, examine it. Where desire contradicts values, examine it. Where knowledge produces arrogance, examine it. Where wealth produces fear instead of freedom, examine it. Where spiritual language separates you from humanity rather than connecting you to it, examine it. The journey is not complete when you possess the right vocabulary. It begins when your life becomes consistent with what you claim to understand. And perhaps that is why ancient wisdom so often turns inward. The seeker travels across kingdoms, searching for the hidden teacher, then returns home. The seeker searches through manuscripts, then discovers the real manuscript is the self. The seeker searches for divine power, then discovers that self-mastery is harder and more consequential than controlling circumstances. Eventually, the direction changes. The journey outward becomes a journey inward, and what seemed like a search for forbidden knowledge becomes something simpler. Learning to live with greater awareness, responsibility, and compassion. The journey outward eventually becomes a journey inward. Chapter 12. Divine Power Without Supernatural Fantasy. For centuries, people have been fascinated by stories of hidden knowledge. Somewhere, they imagine there must be a forgotten formula, a sacred phrase, an ancient vibration, a secret mental technique capable of bending circumstances to human desire. The fantasy is understandable. A person facing illness wants control. A person facing poverty wants security. A person facing uncertainty wants certainty. And a person approaching old age naturally wonders whether there is some hidden law that can protect everything they have spent a lifetime building. But here we must become careful. The ancient Hermetic writings deserve curiosity precisely because they are more philosophically interesting than many modern interpretations of them. The Corpus Hermeticum does not provide a laboratory formula for commanding the universe, and the 7 principles popularly associated with the Kybalion belong to a much later work, not to the ancient Hermetic corpus itself. That distinction matters, because wisdom becomes weaker when history is replaced by fantasy. The ancient seeker was not necessarily searching for supernatural domination. He was searching for transformation. Imagine a teacher in an ancient courtyard speaking to a student who has spent years asking the same question. How can I become powerful? The teacher might have answered with a more uncomfortable question. Power over what? The student might name enemies, circumstances, fortune, other people. The teacher then asks, and who governs your anger? Silence. Who governs your fear? Silence. Who governs your appetite? More silence. Who governs your tongue when you are insulted? Now the student has nothing to say. That is the beginning of real philosophy, because the easiest person to imagine controlling is everyone else. The hardest person to govern is yourself. You may spend years trying to influence another person's opinion while remaining unable to control your own reaction to criticism. You may dream about financial abundance while refusing to control impulsive spending. You may ask for peace while beginning every morning by consuming outrage. You may desire a better relationship while refusing to examine your own defensiveness. You may seek enlightenment while becoming furious whenever someone questions your beliefs. This is where ancient wisdom becomes practical. Divine power, understood philosophically, can mean the cultivation of capacities that make a human being less enslaved by impulse, attention, the ability to decide what deserves your mind, wisdom, the ability to distinguish appearance from consequence, courage, the ability to act despite uncertainty, compassion, the ability to remember that other people are not merely obstacles or instruments, discipline, the ability to continue doing what matters after excitement disappears. These powers do not produce dramatic miracles. They produce something quieter, a different life. Consider an older man who has spent decades reacting to everyone around him. A careless remark ruins his afternoon. A disagreement destroys his peace. A financial setback convinces him that everything is collapsing. A family member makes a decision he dislikes, and he spends 3 days rehearsing arguments in his head. Now imagine that same man beginning to practice a simple discipline. Pause before responding. Observe the emotion, name it. Ask what action would serve his values rather than his anger. Nothing supernatural has happened, yet something extraordinary has changed. He is no longer completely governed by whatever enters his mind. That is power. Not power over reality, power over reaction, not power over other people. Power over attention, not power over the future. Power over preparation. And preparation changes possibility. A person who becomes disciplined becomes capable of opportunities they previously could not handle. A person who becomes emotionally mature can sustain relationships that their former self would have destroyed. A person who learns financial restraint can use resources differently. A person who learns patience can recognize opportunities that desperation would have missed. This is why the language of transformation should be treated carefully. Raise your vibration can be useful as a metaphor for changing one's emotional and behavioral state, but it should not become an excuse for believing that every illness, loss, or financial hardship was magically created by insufficient positivity. Reality is more complicated. Human beings live inside biology, society, chance, history, economics, relationships, and circumstances they cannot completely control. Ancient philosophy knew this. Stoicism emphasized the distinction between what belongs to our agency and what does not. Aristotle emphasized cultivated character. Cynicism challenged unnecessary attachment. Neoplatonism explored the movement from fragmentation toward unity. Hermetic philosophy explored knowledge of mind, nature, and the human place within the cosmos. Different traditions, different metaphysical assumptions, but one recurring lesson remains. Become responsible for what is actually yours to govern. Your attention is yours. Your choices are yours. Your habits are yours. Your interpretation is often partly yours. Your character is shaped through repeated action. The weather is not yours. Another person's emotions are not yours. The past is not yours. Every outcome is not yours. And accepting that distinction does not make you powerless. It makes your power precise. There is enormous freedom in knowing where responsibility ends. A person who tries to control everything eventually becomes exhausted. A person who refuses responsibility becomes helpless. Wisdom occupies the narrow path between the two. Take responsibility without demanding total control. Act without demanding certainty. Prepare without demanding guarantees. Hope without abandoning reason. Believe without becoming incapable of questioning. That is a more mature interpretation of spiritual power, and perhaps it is more difficult than supernatural fantasy, because nobody else can do it for you. No secret phrase can replace discipline. No mystical title can replace character. No ancient symbol can replace courage. No teacher can perform your inner work. Eventually, the seeker must face the one person who has been present through every chapter, the self, and that is where the next secret begins. Power over yourself is harder and more useful than power over reality. Chapter 13. The human being as a divided creature. There is another mystery hidden inside ordinary human life. Why can one person sincerely promise change in the morning and betray that promise before midnight? At sunrise, he says, "Today will be different." By afternoon, temptation appears. By evening, the old behavior returns. Then comes regret. Then another promise, then another failure. And eventually, the person begins asking a frightening question. Why do I keep doing what I do not want to do? The Hermetic tradition offers a useful philosophical image here. The human being can experience tension between earthly impulses and the higher capacity for understanding. One side seeks immediate satisfaction. It wants pleasure now, recognition now, comfort now, revenge now, security now. Another side can step backward and ask, what will this produce tomorrow? What kind of person am I becoming? Is this desire actually serving me? What is worth sacrificing immediate comfort for? The first voice is urgent, the second is reflective. And the tragedy is that both can exist inside the same person. Imagine an ancient merchant standing in a marketplace. He sees an object he does not need but desperately wants. His appetite says, "Buy it." His pride says, "Others will admire you." His fear says, "What if you never have enough?" But another voice asks, "Will this make your life better?" For a few seconds, an invisible battle occurs. Nothing outside him appears dramatic, yet inside, an entire philosophy of human freedom is being tested. Because freedom does not mean having no desires. Freedom means gaining enough awareness to decide which desires deserve obedience. This is where ancient philosophy becomes deeply relevant to modern psychology. A thought appears, but a thought is not an instruction. An emotion arises, but an emotion is not necessarily a verdict. An impulse emerges, but an impulse does not possess authority simply because it is intense. A thought is not a command. Think about anger. Someone insults you. Immediately the mind produces a response. Answer him. Defend yourself. Make him regret it. The thought arrives before conscious reasoning. But between the thought and the action, there can be a pause. One breath, That breath may seem insignificant. It is not. Within that moment, you can ask, what outcome do I actually want? Suddenly, the insult no longer completely controls the future. The same principle applies to fear. You receive an unexpected financial problem. The mind immediately predicts disaster. You imagine losing everything. You begin acting from panic. But what if you paused? What is actually happening? What is imagined? What can be influenced? What requires action? What requires patience? The pause separates reality from interpretation, and this may be one of the most practical forms of inner power available to a human being. The ancient Hermetic image of the divided human can therefore be interpreted psychologically. We contain competing tendencies. The instinctive self wants immediate relief. The reflective self can consider consequences. The frightened self wants certainty. The wiser self can tolerate uncertainty. The ego wants recognition. The deeper self can ask whether recognition is worth pursuing. None of this requires believing that humans literally contain two separate supernatural beings. It is a description of an inner conflict almost everyone recognizes. And age can make this conflict especially visible. A younger person may spend years pursuing status because everyone around them is pursuing it. Later, after retirement, they may discover that the title they once defended no longer exists. The question becomes, who am I when the applause stops? That is not merely an identity crisis. It can become an initiation, because when external identities weaken, the person finally gets an opportunity to discover whether anything deeper has been cultivated. Perhaps wisdom, perhaps patience, perhaps friendship, perhaps service, perhaps contemplation, perhaps character. The Hermetic path, at its most practical, does not ask you to destroy the earthly human. You still need food, money, relationships, rest, ambition, responsibility. The goal is not to become detached from life. It is to stop becoming completely enslaved by every impulse life produces. So practice something simple today. When you feel a strong impulse, anger, fear, desire, jealousy, or the urge to immediately respond, wait, take one deliberate breath, name what is happening, then ask, what happens if I choose rather than react? You may still decide to act, but now the action belongs more completely to you. That is the difference. The impulse arrived automatically. The response did not have to. And perhaps this is one of the oldest forms of forbidden knowledge. The person who learns to create a space between impulse and action gradually discovers that they possess more freedom than they once believed. A pause can change a destiny. Chapter 14. The awakening of the mind and the illusion of control return now to Hermes, not the legendary magician of modern imagination, not a supernatural figure promising instant control over circumstances, but Hermes Trismegistus as the symbolic voice through which ancient Hermetic writings explored humanity's relationship with mind, nature, knowledge, and the divine. At the heart of that tradition lies an ancient challenge. Know yourself. It sounds simple. It is not. Because knowing yourself means discovering that the person you call me is not one simple thing. You have memories, desires, fears, and habits, ambitions, contradictions, old wounds, inherited beliefs, unexamined assumptions. And beneath all this lies a strange capacity, the ability to notice what is happening inside you. You can notice anger, you can notice desire, you can notice fear. You can notice the thought that says, I must have this. And the moment you notice it, something changes. There is now a small distance between awareness and impulse. That distance is where freedom begins. The later Hermetic tradition, popularly summarized in the Kybalion, speaks of 7 principles: mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and gender. Again, these should not be confused with the ancient Corpus Hermeticum. But treated as philosophical metaphors, they can become useful questions. Mentalism asks us to examine the role of mind in experience. Correspondence invites reflection on patterns between different levels of life. Vibration can be understood metaphorically as changing states rather than a supernatural frequency dial. Polarity reminds us that experiences often contain apparent opposites. Rhythm points towards cycles: rise and decline, effort and rest, expansion and contraction. Cause and effect demands responsibility for consequences. Gender, interpreted cautiously, can be approached as a symbolic principle of complementary generative forces rather than a literal explanation of every event. These ideas become dangerous only when treated as permission to stop thinking. Ancient wisdom was never improved by blind belief. It becomes useful when it produces better questions. Ask yourself, what mental pattern keeps repeating? What emotional state am I constantly rehearsing? What consequences are my habits creating? Where am I fighting reality unnecessarily? Where am I avoiding responsibility? Where have I mistaken desire for destiny? These questions bring Hermetic philosophy down from the clouds and into ordinary life. Imagine someone approaching retirement after 40 years of work. For decades, their identity has been organized around a profession. Their schedule gave them structure. Their position gave them status. Their colleagues gave them belonging. Then retirement arrives. Suddenly, the external identity becomes quieter. The person may ask, "Who am I now?" This is not merely an economic question. It is a philosophical one. If the mind has been trained to derive worth from productivity, then stopping work can feel like disappearing. But perhaps the crisis contains an invitation. The old identity is ending. A new identity can be consciously built. Teacher, grandparent, mentor, craftsperson, student, volunteer, writer, friend, citizen, or simply a human being learning how to inhabit time without needing every hour to prove worth. This is conscious creation in a much deeper sense, not creating reality through wishful thinking, creating a life through repeated choices. Your thoughts influence what you notice. What you notice influences what you practice. What you practice becomes habit. Habits influence character. Character influences decisions. Decisions create consequences. Consequences reshape circumstances. And circumstances feed back into perception. The process is not instantaneous. It is cumulative. That is why the most important question is not, what do I want reality to give me tomorrow? It is, what am I repeatedly becoming today? Every morning provides evidence. How do you speak when irritated? What do you do when nobody is watching? How do you treat people who cannot benefit you? What happens when you are disappointed? Can you admit that you were wrong? Can you wait? Can you stop? Can you begin again? These ordinary moments are more revealing than extraordinary experiences. A person may experience a profound meditation and remain cruel. Another may never have a mystical experience, yet become patient, generous, courageous, and wise. Which person has transformed more? The question answers itself. The secret was never power. It was responsibility. Not responsibility for every event. Responsibility for participation. You cannot control every season, but you can decide how you enter it. You cannot command another person's heart, but you can decide what kind of person you become in the relationship. You cannot guarantee success, but you can become prepared enough to recognize opportunity. You cannot prevent aging, but you can decide whether aging makes you bitter or discerning. You cannot erase the past, but you can refuse to let the past dictate every future decision. And perhaps this is what awakening finally means: not becoming supernatural, becoming conscious, not becoming superior, becoming honest, not escaping ordinary life, entering it more completely, not controlling reality, governing yourself within reality. So return one final time to the question beneath all the Hermetic language. What is the mind creating? Not merely through grand intentions, through repetition, through attention, through emotional habits, through words, through choices, through what you tolerate, through what you practice, through what you repeatedly believe about yourself. Because your mind is not simply observing your life, it is participating in its construction. And that makes every ordinary moment more consequential than it appears. The person you become is being assembled quietly, one thought, one reaction, one habit, one decision at a time. So ask yourself tonight, before sleep, what kind of person is my mind creating through what I repeatedly think, feel, and do? Do not rush to answer. Sit with it, because perhaps the most dangerous knowledge is not knowledge that gives you supernatural power. Perhaps it is knowledge that removes your excuses. The most dangerous knowledge is the knowledge that makes excuses impossible. The central mystery of Hermetic philosophy was never merely about gaining extraordinary power. It was about knowing the mind through which you experience existence. The Corpus Hermeticum belongs to the religious, philosophical world of late antiquity, and its ideas should not be confused with every modern teaching that uses the word Hermetic. The later Kybalion, for example, presents its own seven-principle framework and was published centuries after the ancient Hermetic texts. But across these layers of tradition, one question continues to fascinate. What happens when a human being becomes conscious of consciousness itself? That question is more demanding than any promise of instant manifestation. Because if you believe you can simply command the universe, you can blame the universe when things do not happen. But if you begin studying your own mind, excuses become harder. You notice how fear influences decisions. You notice how resentment alters perception. You notice how desire convinces you that happiness exists somewhere in the future. You notice how status can become a substitute for meaning. You notice how possessions can become chains when fear guards them. You notice how spiritual knowledge itself can become another costume for pride. And slowly, something begins to change, not necessarily outside you, inside you. You begin to recognize that attention is not neutral. What you repeatedly look at becomes psychologically larger. Fear teaches the mind to search for danger. Envy teaches it to compare. Gratitude trains it to notice what remains. Curiosity teaches it to investigate. Compassion teaches it to look beyond the boundaries of the self. Your attention becomes a kind of invisible sculptor. And whatever you repeatedly give it begins to influence the shape of your inner world. This does not mean that thoughts magically control every external event. That would be an attractive idea, but it would also be a dangerous one. Human beings do not control illness, death, economic cycles, other people's decisions, natural disasters. or every circumstance that enters their lives. Ancient wisdom does not become stronger by pretending otherwise. It becomes stronger when it teaches us where our responsibility actually begins. You may not control every event, but you can examine perception. You may not control another person's behavior, but you can examine your response. You may not control the future, but you can prepare for it. You may not control aging, but you can decide what kind of wisdom you cultivate while aging. You may not control loss, but you can refuse to let loss destroy every remaining possibility. That is a different definition of power, and perhaps it is the more difficult one. Imagine two people standing in the same storm. One spends the entire night shouting at the sky. The other cannot stop the rain either. But he studies the ground, protects what can be protected, helps the person beside him, and waits intelligently for morning. The storm is identical. Their relationship with it is not. That difference is where philosophy becomes lived wisdom. The ancient seeker eventually understands that awakening is not an escape from reality. It is a different way of meeting reality. The cave becomes awareness. The mirror becomes self-knowledge. The flame becomes disciplined attention. The symbol becomes a question. The ancient manuscript becomes a doorway into reflection. And the supposed secret becomes responsibility. This is why the teaching can be uncomfortable, because it asks you to stop waiting for someone else to transform your life. A teacher can point, a book can illuminate, a philosophy can provide language, a tradition can preserve questions. But none of them can perform your inner work. You must observe the mind. You must question your assumptions. You must confront your habits. You must decide what deserves your attention. You must practice what you claim to believe. And you must discover whether your philosophy survives contact with ordinary life, because wisdom is not demonstrated when everything goes according to plan. It is demonstrated when something goes wrong, when someone insults you, when money becomes uncertain, when a relationship changes, when your body begins to age, when recognition disappears, when the future refuses to cooperate with your expectations. That is when the philosophy becomes real. Can you remain conscious? Can you remain responsible? Can you remain compassionate? Can you remain capable of questioning yourself? That may be a deeper initiation than any secret ceremony. So perhaps the Corpus Hermeticum was never dangerous because it contained a formula for commanding the universe. Perhaps it was dangerous because it placed responsibility back into the hands of the individual. It whispered a possibility that is far less glamorous than supernatural control and far more demanding. You are responsible for becoming conscious of the mind through which you experience your life. And once you understand that, the ordinary begins to